Designers, what do you do when a client completely rejects your creative direction and instead wants you to create something that you know will just look plain bad? Do you stick to your guns, or do you do exactly what the client tells you to do? Stay tuned, my answer might surprise you. Hey, my name is Luke Seavers with 19Pro. I'm a brand designer and web marketing consultant. And today's question comes from a fellow designer named Hafiz. Now, by the way, Hafiz actually has another YouTube channel where he goes over different Photoshop tutorials. So be sure and check that out in the description below. But Hafiz writes, what do you do when you design a beautiful logo, but the client doesn't like it, and instead he or she desires a worse one? As a branding expert, first I give them suggestions and an explanation behind it, but still I always end up doing what they want. Hafiz, I totally understand where you're coming from here, and I've been there before. Sometimes a client may come back and request revisions that you know will just make the design look completely bad. Or maybe they tell you to scrap the entire design and then they proceed to dictate how you should design it. So this can be very frustrating. And a lot of times in the design world, we almost have an inside joke where it kind of feels like it's the designer versus the client. But that's kind of sad. It really should not be that way. You know, there certainly are difficult clients out there, but 90% of the time, it's really not the client who's at fault. It's actually us as designers who are at fault. That's because we don't set clear expectations and we don't qualify the client ahead of time. So if you find yourself in this situation right now, what I would tell you to do is just take a moment and accept responsibility that you probably could have handled this a little bit better. And you can always do better next time, but continue to handle the situation graciously with your client and deliver exactly what you promised you would do for them. But now what I want to do is walk you through a little bit of my process so that you can know how you can handle this better next time. So one thing you might be asking is, isn't the customer always right? No. And yes. So my job as a designer and a brand consultant is to do what's in the best interest of my client to help them grow their business. And because of that, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm there to just make every single idea that comes into their head. Because, you know, if any of those ideas are not in their best interest, are not going to help enhance their brand, I have to speak up about that. Remember, they hired me for a reason, and this is a very important point. It's not because I can just design whatever they want. I probably could, but they hired me for my expertise to help them enhance their brand. Now, all of that might sound nice, but there's only one way that you can make this work, and that's by being selective with who your clients are. To do that, you need to know who your ideal client is. Your ideal client is going to be someone who understands and respects your expertise that you bring to the table. Now, this is the key, because a client that hires you because you are the expert and because you are going to help them work towards their business goals is going to be a lot more receptive to your ideas and your designs. So if you have any pushback to some of their ideas, they're also going to be a lot more receptive. So someone who would be a not so ideal client is someone who wants to dictate the entire process. This sort of person has an idea in their head and they basically want you to make it for them. But that's not really the job for most of us designers. So in that case, you have to be willing to decline the project. Now, I know it can be very difficult to say no to a paying client, but trust me, the mental strain that can come from dealing with a difficult client is just not worth what they might be paying you. This leads me to my next point, which is you need to have a process for qualifying your leads. So this can be done by a simple questionnaire online, or you can do what I do, and I just get to know them, I ask them questions, and get down to whether or not they would be my ideal client. So if it turns out that they are not meeting that criteria, then you can just simply say that, you know, I feel like I may not be the best fit for you. But you can also go on to recommend maybe another designer who may be interested in the project. Step number 3 is to set clear expectations both before and after they become your client. This is so important because communication is very important. You need to share with them the entire process, what they can expect, and also share what is included and not included. You know, it's okay to have limitations to the project because your time is valuable and you cannot work for an indefinite amount of time. I do this by providing up to 2 rounds of revisions. And so far, each client has been completely happy with the design that's come out, even among those 2 revisions. Now, I'm upfront that we can always do more revisions, but there will be an extra cost for that. Realize that clients are completely okay with this as long as it's communicated clearly upfront. So along those same lines, you need to have a contract. This is something a lot of creatives neglect to do, but it's very important to have things in writing. Now, obviously a contract is a legal document, but the way I see it is it's a way to make sure that we're on the same page about the scope of the project and expectations. This also helps prevent scope creep, because if the client is asking for something that is beyond the scope of the project, we can always go back to the contract and review what was originally agreed upon. So on to my last point, which is to have different benchmarks and different check-ins with your client. What I mean by this is instead of getting the scope of the project and then at the very end presenting all the designs at once, you have kind of different benchmarks where you ask the client, are we on the right track? Now I could go in a lot of different directions with this, so I'm just going to focus on branding and logo design. So what I recommend doing is providing several different iterations and logo concepts rather than just one. This provides options for the client to choose from. What I do is I provide a standard of 3 concepts. And what you should do is don't just create 3 variations of the same logo, create 3 distinctly different logos. Think of them as 3 avenues we can explore. So maybe you even have like a very conservative version, a very progressive version, and maybe one in the middle. And you ask the client which avenue we should go down. Now also, make sure that each of those designs are at the top of your game. It's actually very difficult to create 3 great logos. I think for myself, I found myself in the middle of a project getting 2 great ones and then you start to lose steam. But don't give up on that 3rd logo. Make sure it's still at the top of your game because the client might choose it, and make sure that you're happy with them choosing that one. All right, well that's all I have for you today. I hope that you really learned something from getting to hear a little bit about my design process so that you can start providing excellent service to your clients and avoid a lot of those frustrations as well. If you like the content for today, be sure and give it a thumbs up. And for more tips for business, marketing, and design, be sure and subscribe. If you have any specific questions you want me to answer on this channel, also leave a comment below with your question. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.